Welcome, everyone. I'm Beth Sulleberger, president of Women's City Club, and I'm glad you've joined us tonight for an important program about the ability of schools to provide truthful and complete education about our history and current affairs. Women's City Club is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization founded in 1915 to educate, engage, and empower individuals to participate in civic life in Greater Cincinnati. This program is presented in conjunction with our Social Justice Action Group and co-sponsored by Action Tank, All in Cincinnati, the Cincinnatus Association, the School Board School, and the Urban League of Greater Southwestern Ohio. I want to thank Susan Noonan, who organized the program, Jeff Dye, our VP for programs, Sarah Gideons, our communications committee chair, and Donna Tukel, our communications manager, for their efforts in bringing this program to us. Last spring, two bills were introduced in the Ohio House of Representatives that prohibit a list of so-called divisive concepts in Ohio schools and universities receiving public funds, written as part of a nationwide campaign against the teaching of critical race theory, aka CRT. The bill's overall intent is to censor and restrict education about racism, sexism, and gender identity in our history, current events, and civic engagement. Tonight, we present a panel of three educators who will share their insights about the struggle to teach the truth. We welcome an honest and civil discussion of all points of view. If you have comments or questions, you may type them in the chat. Susan Noonan will now introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Beth. Actually, let me just say, if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A. So comments can go in the chat, but any questions we'd like you to put in Q&A, and those will be asked after our panelists. So I am Susan Noonan. I'm glad to be here. I'm thrilled to have the incredible panelists that we have with us tonight. I want to just let you know what the format will be. We're going to have three panelists do a presentation, after which we will have any interaction among them if they have questions of each other. And we will then have Q&A, and we will end with Amy Bottomley giving us some of the initiatives that the Freedom Center is now doing. So I would like to introduce all three of our panelists in the beginning so we don't have long interruptions between their presentations. So I'm going to start with Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. And he assured me it's okay to call him Hassan, so I will. He's an associate professor of history at The Ohio State University, where he teaches courses on civil rights and Black Power movement. Hassan was born in Brooklyn, New York, another Northeasterner, and graduated summa cum laude from Morehouse College with a BA in history. He earned a PhD in American history with a specialization in African American history from Duke University in 2002. And after teaching for a year at University of Alabama, he joined the faculty at Ohio State and has been there since 2003. Hassan has written several books, but his latest book, In the Shadow of Civil Rights, examines the Black experience in New York City from 1977 to 1993. And it aims to provide a new narrative of the Black experience in the post-civil rights era, because he believes this is essential to properly understanding race and racism in contemporary America. He's also worked on several documentary films, but pertinent to our program today, in the classroom, Hassan takes great pride in teaching his students to understand the past and the present. This has led him to push the very boundaries of what we think of as a classroom. For his creativity and effectiveness, he received the Ohio State's 2012 Alumni Award for Distinguished Teaching. And in 2019, he received another award from University College at Ohio State, University College of Arts and Sciences for Outstanding Teacher Award. So Hassan resides in Columbus with a wife and 3 daughters. So glad to have him. Our second speaker will be Lanisha Simmons, who is the ELA curriculum manager for grades 7 through 12 at Cincinnati Public. She grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and attended college at Ohio University. We have some competition here. She's been in education for almost 10 years and has worked with grades 7 through 12. She has a Bachelor of Science in Integrated Language Arts Education and a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. Lanisha truly believes that knowledge is power, and her mission is to empower students to use that power for change. During her short time at Cincinnati Public, she has adopted and implemented a new curriculum for grades 7 through 12. She also has founded the Justice in Details Lunch and Learn, which provides a safe space for educators to discuss issues and solutions around racism and bias within the education system. In the end, she understands that as educators, we have to create a safe space that provides all students with access to knowledge, along with the tools to empower them to be critical thinkers with the ability to influence and be catalysts for change. And our third speaker is Al Pacino Beauchamp, who is the principal. He has served in public education for over 15 years, began his teaching career as a math and science instructor in the Northwest Local School District. He then served as principal at the Marva Collins Preparatory Academy or school, I guess it is, for a year, after which he embarked on a 5-year effort to earn an MBA, work in corporate America, and teach business students at the collegiate level. After doing all that, his experience in business helped to shape his views on the collaboration of schools and the business community. In February of 2018, Al Pacino Beauchamp was chosen by Roberts Academy, LSDMC, as the principal. He believes that the education system's sole purpose is to help students reach their maximum potential and strives to give them the knowledge they need to succeed. He also believes that parents' greatest strength is advocacy. So he gives advice to all of his parents: speak up, get loud, get annoying, and learn how you can advocate for your child's success. So with that, we are going to start with Dr. Jeffries, who I think will talk about the importance of teaching honest history. And we hope he might touch on how Sub-Bill House 327 might impact that ability. Thank you, Dr. Jeffries.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, Susan, for the introduction, for the warm words of welcome. It's great to be a part of this conversation with my distinguished panelists. And I'm so glad that the Women's City Club is hosting this conversation, especially at this critical juncture in our civic life. I want to begin. I want to share my screen in a second, but I just want to begin just by offering a little sort of what are we dealing with? Why are we even here? Why are we even having this conversation? This year, 24 state legislatures have introduced 54 bills, including Ohio, which has introduced 2 bills. 11 of these bills are now law, and they're all designed to restrict teaching and training of race and racism in K through 12 schools, in higher education, in state agencies, and in state institutions, specifically designed or intending to ban instruction or training in this thing called divisive concepts. You know, what's the goal of this legislation? I want to just, because this is what we're going to talk about. I just want to have some sort of groundwork here. You know, the goal is simply and clearly to legislate what children as well as adults can talk about and can learn in the classroom when it comes to questions of race and racism. This is about silencing critiques of the American past and the American present that revolve around race and racism. There's so much conversation and discussion and misinformation about this thing called critical race theory and what it is and what it isn't. And I'm sure we'll get into both what it is and what it isn't in a second over the course of this hour. But what it is something that's not very complicated. It is simply a framework for understanding the American past and present that says you have to take race and racism seriously as factors that have and continue to shape the contours of people's lives. That's it. It's not really that difficult to understand. It's pretty straightforward, and it's been around for 40 years. But there's so much misinformation swirling around it that we now have wound up in this situation where we have bills coming up and being passed across the country that are literally designed to stifle freedom of speech, academic freedom, the push towards creating a more diverse America, a more diverse democracy. I'm a historian, so I want to back up a little bit and put sort of how we arrived at this moment into a little bit of context, because this isn't just a dialogue and discussion about academics and education. This is something that is born out of politics, and so we have to connect the dots, if you will. So I'm just going to go share my screen, and then we'll dive right in. You know, the 1619, there's so much conversation and discussion and people losing their minds over the 1619 project and what this was. 1619 marked the 400th anniversary of the arrival of enslaved Africans in the shores of colonial Virginia. That's it. Ain't no mystery behind what happened in 1619. And so 2 years ago, the New York Times, USA Today, Washington Post, rightly so, said we need to spend some time marking this moment. What did it mean for the trajectory of not just the Black experience, but the American experience? And so it's a wonderful, I'm so glad that they did it. And I had a conversation with many of the authors, you know, while they were doing these things. But then why did people lose their mind over it, right? Because we begin to see, right, coming out of sort of the radical right, and they just got to, this is not about being partisan, it's just saying, where did these things emanate from, and where did they evolve from, and how did they evolve? From political conservatives, all right, like, no, we can't talk about 1619 and American slavery, and somehow this was foundational to the development and the course of America. Like slavery, yes, slavery is important. At what point should we not be talking about slavery? I mean, this was a conscious decision on the part of American colonists and the founding fathers. All of them were like, yeah, no, we're okay with slavery, right? We're going to put protections into the Constitution to maintain the institution of slavery. These guys aren't abolitionists. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, all of them are enslavers. James Madison enslaved 100 people over the course of his lifetime, never freed a single soul. These are not abolitionists. They were Thomas Jefferson is committed to creating a white man's democracy, at the top of which are people who are holding people in bondage just like himself. That was the whole purpose of the University of Virginia. The University of Virginia will remain all white and all male up until 1970. Right? These aren't accidents in history. And we can trace the thinking behind that to this critical moment in time, 1619. This is hard history. Hard history are those aspects of our past that usually revolve around race and racism that make us uncomfortable in the present. We're uncomfortable talking about Thomas Jefferson as an enslaver. He can write all men are created equal, but when we put that in the context of the time, we understand that he's not talking about anybody else but white men. And he's also at the same time raping a 14-year-old, 15-year-old Black girl who he claims ownership over. And we don't want to deal with that, but we have to. That's the beginning. That's the foundation. These are the framers. We got statues to them. We got to put them in their proper context. That's hard history. Then things get a little bit harder because these issues are not just in the past. And in 2020, in the middle of this pandemic, we see the largest protest in American history. The largest protest in American history. Some 30, 35 million people taken to the streets in June of 2020 alone. The March on Washington, the largest demonstrations in the civil rights movement, had 250,000 people for one evening on a Sunday. And then they went home. We're talking about 30 to 35 million people, mostly young people who are leading this charge, demanding justice for the victims of police violence, recognition of Black humanity. That's why we saw those beautiful murals, and there's a beautiful mural right down there in Cincinnati, Black Lives Matter, saying, look, we gotta deal with the truth, take down these monuments to white supremacy, we gotta deal with the historical truth. But then, and this is the key, then they also started saying we gotta calling for an end to systemic racism. And that was it right there. Because now Black folk have been like, look, we gotta deal with institutions and the ways in which systems and structures of racism have evolved over time. That was the central part of the Black power critique. So Black people have been saying, look, we got to deal with institutional racism. We got to deal with systemic racism for a long time. But this is the first time that we have seen this many white people saying, you know what? Systemic racism may be a problem. We got to move beyond the sort of individual critiques of racism and deal with the ways in which racial discrimination is perpetuated in systems and structures. That's fundamentally different. You know, up until this point, little Kylie never came home talking about, Mom, we got to deal with systemic racism, right? And so so mom was like, oh, what's happening here, right? So systemic racism becomes an issue. And then what do we see? Here in Ohio, make it local. The State Board of Education of Ohio passes a very important and very strong resolution condemning racism, saying, look, this is July on the heels of this. This is July of 2020. Look, we've done wrong in the past, and we got to do better. We've done wrong by our Black and brown children. We've done wrong by our children of color, and we're going to do better. That's all it was. An important statement, especially when you've just seen the largest protest in American history. Keep that in mind, because this is when we begin to see sort of those who do not want to deal with the issue of systemic racism beginning to push back. So now we move into the fall, right? So we move from hard history, let's talk about 1619, what I call hard-headed history, and this silliness, this 1776 report, right? Because you say, oh no, this is the patriotic education. This is just another silliness. There's nothing more patriotic than actually saying we need to take a critical look at America's past and present. And so we see this executive order that the former president Donald Trump passes, and he's like, look, you can't talk about racism, you can't talk about inequality and all this other stuff, and systemic racism. Now, normally you could just dismiss this stuff, right? It's just politics, playing culture wars. But it gets picked up. So all of those bills that I talked about, the 52, 54 or so, 24 state legislatures, 54 bills that have been passed just in this year alone, every single one of them picks up on language that is in this executive order. It's just copycat legislation. That's all it is. Nothing about it is original. And it's all stemming from this. And so, but it doesn't happen in October or November or December. We only begin to see it happen when? After Donald Trump loses the election. This is the politics of it. You can't separate the politics from this educational discussion that we're having now. Because when Donald Trump loses the election, and he loses it on this big lie that the election was stolen, the election was fraudulent because Black people participated in it. Like, the election wasn't stolen because white people outside of Cincinnati didn't vote for him. The election was stolen because Black people in Atlanta, Black people in Philadelphia, Black people in Milwaukee voted for him. So we can't separate that. Now, if we had been dealing with this hard history, we had maybe a little bit of critical race theory in some classes when people came to college or law school, perhaps they wouldn't have fallen for this silliness, right? And we would have seen, like, no, there's actually a long history of political violence justified by racism that would allow folk to think that an election is fraudulent simply because Black people played a central role in its outcome, right? So January 6th is critical, because then what do we see after this? Right now, there's this concern that but now it ain't talking about Black people, we're talking about white people. Those white people who were most animated by Trump's racism, and let's just be clear, racism is the most powerful political organizing tool that America has ever created. This is why you got to deal with 1619. That wasn't an accident. That's white supremacy and racism all the way through. Most powerful political organizing tool America has ever created. And Donald Trump, he knew enough to tap into it. And there's this fear by political conservatives that those who were animated by Trump's racism are going to be lost. They're not going to be engaged anymore. So what do we see? First thing we see this wave of voter suppression laws, right? Because this is about politics. And then on the heels of that, then we get to see the critical race theory bans. Why? This is the culture thing. Because the racism, how can we get those who may not have been animated by his racism, but are still very much involved in this idea of the culture wars, right? And so we see how this has played on the conservative side of the aisle for the last 40 years. We're coming for your unborn children. We're coming for your Bible. We're coming for your guns, right? And now we're coming for your children, because we're teaching them all this stuff that somehow in the classrooms of America, white children, little Kylie and Billy, are being told that they are inherently racist. Hey, where is that happening? That is not happening. It's not happening anywhere. It's not happening in Ohio at all. I was on a panel with one of the representatives who introduced the bill, and we were asking for evidence. He said, well, no, parents called me and said that they were concerned. I was like, is that all it takes to get bills passed, to get bills introduced? Because I got some concerns too, without evidence. Why? Because this was a political ploy. This was about scaring people. And they know that racism scares people. And for the elected officials, they also understand that what people were asking for, to go back to 2020 and those protests, what young people were asking for in particular, they were asking for change. They were like, this society isn't working for everybody, and we got to do something about it. Systemic racism. Now, for the elected officials, they're like, oh, if you're asking us to do something we don't want to do, then what is our response to say that systemic racism doesn't exist? It's a fiction. It's a fabrication. And that gets us to this sort of critical race theory ban, and the bans that then stem from it. Because nobody's teaching critical race theory, this legal framework in the classrooms of K through 12. It's not happening. But what is being taught in classrooms, and should be taught in classrooms, and we should be doing it much better than we are, is talking about the history of race and racism, talking about the ways that race and racism continue to inform students' lives and the lives of people in American society. We have to be talking about that, because that helps students not only understand the past, but it also helps them understand the present, so that they can make better decisions and solve the problems that we haven't solved today, in the future, tomorrow. And this last word, and then I'll be quiet and hand it off. I know time. I want to be respectful of my panelists, my co-panelists. What's the effect of this, right? Like, if this was just politics, this is just Trump being Trump, political conservatives being political conservatives, culture wars, then we could leave it at that. But it's not. Now it's become legislation. Now we see two real things that are happening. One, the actual potential of censoring what is taught in the classroom, right? What teachers can actually teach. We see this, and it's already taking form in terms of book bans, and we're seeing it rippling across the country. Texas, calling for legislators in Texas saying, look, we got to have a review, an inventory of all books dealing with race, racism, gender, questions of gender, questions of sexual identity. We're seeing book bans. We saw it come up in counties in Pennsylvania and counties in Virginia. We saw the governor of Virginia essentially running on an issue of banning Toni Morrison. Like, oh my God, they're talking about slavery. And so slavery didn't happen. Like, what? I don't understand. I do understand what it is. But look, this is serious, because even in those instances, and when we go back to the House bills, you see there are actually real punishments for this. Now, we don't, these things are so broad, so we don't know what will fall under them if they're actually passed. But we're talking about withholding funds from school districts, potentially firing teachers, and not just K through 12, but myself too. And I got tenure. You can't do that. And what are you doing? But this is everything. That's the chilling effect is very real as well, right? Because I talk to a lot of K through 12 teachers. I work with K through 12 teachers, and they're saying we are afraid to talk about the issues that we need to talk about in the classroom. We're afraid. And we can't, because somebody, who was in public school 50 years ago didn't learn that lynching occurred. And so now they're like, oh, that's making my kid uncomfortable. You know what's more uncomfortable than learning about lynching? Being lynched. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to prevent the continuation of the problems that were born of race and racism in American society. And the only way you can do that is if you teach this history honestly, because this isn't about repeating things. This is about continuing to do the same things that we have done in the past. It's time to disrupt that. And that's what teachers have been trying to do, disrupt that continuum of hard history, of not knowing. But this is going to set us back. And it already has. And with that, I'll pass the mic, as we used to say. I'll pass the mic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that passion. And kind of calming down here. And our next speaker will be Lanisha Simmons, because CPS does have an anti-racism policy. And she's going to talk a little bit about the curriculum review and enhancements that have happened since CPS passed that anti-racism policy. Unfortunately, our legislators disavowed ours. So go ahead, Lanisha. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Jeffries, for kicking us off strong.
Yes.
All right, so yes, I'm going to share a little bit about what's been happening in Cincinnati Public Schools around our anti-racist statement and inclusiveness. So I'm going to speak specifically to K-12 English language arts. And we've been doing a lot of work around making sure we are providing an affirming and engaging way students can see themselves in the curriculum and throughout their classrooms. So one thing that we stand on and that we truly believe in is our equity statement. So a few years ago, our department and even principals, leadership across the district, we attended a conference brought to us by Unbound Ed called the Standards Institute. And this statement just truly resonated with us. So we brought it back to the district and adapted it to fit kind of what we were working towards. But the statement talks about ensuring every child, regardless of circumstances, receives high quality, standards aligned, on grade level curriculum and instruction. That is the goal. That is what we are working towards in Cincinnati Public Schools. But we know there are multiple pieces that we need to put in place in order for this to happen and truly show student achievement. So as the curriculum and instruction department, along with the anti-racism policy, we have our anti-racist statement. So what we are working towards, we're working towards cultivating an anti-racist community, and that is by providing education and awareness. So as Dr. Jeffries was speaking about, we have to make sure people are aware of what's taking place before we can even get to the next steps. So through education and awareness, and then providing a safe space where we can actually have those courageous conversations, we can actually discuss what's going on and come up with those solutions. So then identifying racist policies, practices, and ideas. Through the anti-racism policy, we will use interventions and strategies to disrupt the system, because again, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to disrupt the system so we don't repeat the same thing as the past, be able to provide equity and access for all of our students, each and every one of our students that attend Cincinnati Public Schools, regardless of their circumstances. So our framework, and what I'm going to dive into before I get into the work that we've done, is we live under the umbrella of accelerated learning. So we want to push our students forward, again, as our equity statement says, regardless of circumstances. But then we know there are multiple pieces that we have to have working together. Now, before this critical race theory came about, or at least the conversation became more broad, we refer to CRT as culturally responsive teaching. We now say culturally responsive teaching and learning, so it is not to be confused, but it's all falling under the same umbrella. We have to have those conversations. We have to give the hard truth so we can create those safe and inclusive spaces for students that really promote student voice. In order to create student voice, students have to see themselves and they have to know their history so they can know what to do next. So this presentation, I'm going to focus in on the culture responsive teaching and learning section about inclusive spaces. So in order to move our anti-racist statement forward, in order to move our equity statement forward, there are a lot of things there are some things that need to happen in the classroom. Our very first call to action for Cincinnati Public Schools was making sure we find new and affirming ways students can see themselves in the classroom. So over the last couple of years, we have adopted an ELA curriculum, a math curriculum, a social studies curriculum. We're now working on adopting world languages as well as science. This is having an adopted high quality curriculum is at the foundation of this work as we're talking about culture responsive teaching and learning, as we're talking about inclusiveness and diversity. We really want to ensure that it's not in isolation of high quality instruction, but we know it needs to be a part of it. So I'm going to focus in on call to action number 1 and share some of those things with you all. So one of the big projects that we worked on was our K-12 ELA standards alignment. So with this project, we was spearheaded by Dr. Christine Gibson, who is our ELA Curriculum Council Chair here in CPS. She we were looking at the social emotional learning standards as well as the social justice standards that were released in the last year or so. So we wanted to look at our ELA lessons that were a part of our adopted curriculum, and we wanted to be able to see how we can enhance those, how we can make those better to ensure students can see themselves while also allowing them to affirm themselves as part of the process. So again, that's why we wanted to bring in the SEL standards as well as the social justice standards as a part of this process. So first, we looked at books. We looked at the books that are available within the curriculum. So within the K-6 and 7-12 curriculum, we looked at who the authors were. We looked at, just how diverse it actually is, how affirming it actually is for our students. And from that, it was decided that we needed to add some supplemental material. So we were able to do a large order of 36,000 books for students across the district. The teachers selected the books based on what they felt students want and what was engaging for students in the classroom. Some of the pictures you see on the page are the books that were selected. And again, for every student, K through 12, 36,000 books to expand the text sets. We also, again, making sure it's not in isolation of strong instruction, we connected it to our curriculum guides to ensure that it's still aligned with the core of what teachers are teaching. That's very important to make sure there's alignment. So from Hair Love, which is a more recent book, to The Snowy Day, The House on Mango Street, The Boy in Striped Pajamas, just text to ensure we had a greater representation of student culture and experience. Now, we know that our students are not monolithic. We know every book is not going to represent everyone, but just increasing the opportunity, increasing that space is very, very important to us as part of that process. The next part of the project, again, this was a large project. So the next part of the project goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning, which was looking at the Ohio Social Emotional Learning Standards and looking at the social justice standards. So our teachers, again, they looked at the lessons that are currently in our core curriculum, and they first looked at certain lessons that they could extend. So they said, okay, this particular lesson is talking about this particular topic, but it's missing some different perspectives. It's missing some sides to this particular story. So how can we enhance or extend these lessons? So this is an example of one of the extensions that one of our teachers from Dater High School, Glenetta Krause, created for teachers. So in the 712 core curriculum, they're exploring and analyzing the Declaration of Independence. So to enhance or extend that lesson, she did a comparison to the Black Panther 10-point plan and how those connect to one another, or well, actually having students look into, do they connect to one another? Are similar promises being made? As you can see, the questions on the right, which parts are different? Who's the audiences? Whose story is being told? Whose story is not being told? But really just finding ways to extend these lessons to show the full picture, to again, show the full scope of what is actually taking place. So there are many lessons like this, K-12, that we shared out with teachers at the beginning of this year. We've had many teachers using the lessons so far. At the end of the first semester, we are going to get feedback from the teachers that have used the lessons to see how we can enhance them, and to also see what they want to continue to see. And because of this work, our vendor, our vendor for the curriculum, is now also wanting feedback from our teachers to revamp their table of contents. So they're asking our teachers, what should we keep? What should we take away? How can we enhance representation in our textbooks? And that's powerful that they're asking for our teachers' feedback, and they are definitely going to give it to make sure it's providing our students what they need. So we've gotten just great anecdotal feedback from teachers who have used these lessons, and hopefully they use them as a model to continue this work, and even lessons that we haven't created, that understanding. Even though we have a high quality curriculum, there are perspectives that are missing. And we want to make sure, again, that all perspectives are a part of these conversations. We also this year, prior to this year, we did not have any schools that had an African American literature course. We do have schools that have African American history, and this year was all about spreading those to more schools. But for African American literature, this is our first year, and we have 4 schools that are piloting our African American literature course and helping us to build out the curriculum. The goal is to allow this course to be a graduation credit for our students. So rather than taking the English 12 British Lit course, they're able to take the African American literature course, and that qualifies as a credit for graduation for them. That is the goal for next year for this course. When we brought this course to the forefront, one thing we wanted to do was make sure it was not only centered around slavery. We know a lot about slavery. So while we want it to be a part of the conversation, we want students to have a strong understanding of it. We also want them to see the joy, the resilience, the hope that is also a part of this process. So we have teachers piloting different resources. Even some of our curricular vendors are offering different resources for teachers as part of this course. So we're really excited to see where it's going to go and what it's going to do to increase student achievement for students in Cincinnati Public Schools. So to close out, we've done a lot of research by Zaretta Hammond, again, culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And one thing she says is, our challenge as culturally responsive teachers or as educators is to create an environment that the brain perceives as safe and nurturing so it can relax, let go of any stress, and turn its attention to learn. And in order to do that, we want our students to be engaged. We want them to be affirmed. We want them to feel safe. We want them to feel welcomed. So we have to give the full picture. We have to tell the full story. We have to make sure our students feel safe and feel included in their classrooms so we can reach the goal that we're all working towards. So that's a little bit about what's happening in Cincinnati Public Schools and our ELA department.
That's really awesome. That's wonderful. You're doing such great stuff. Really proud of Cincinnati. So last we are going to go to Al Pacino Beauchamp, and Al Pacino is going to discuss some of the challenges that he sees as a principal in his school and other schools that teachers have in trying to teach the multicultural inclusive education. At least I think that's what you're going to talk about, Al. Right?
Yes. So thank you again to the Women's City Club, and I'm proud to be with my panelists, Miss Dr. Jeffries. This is my first time meeting you, and you spoke very eloquently earlier and really even educated me a little bit. And Miss Simmons she's my colleague, so so I see her and we work together. So what I'll sort of, and I didn't have a presentation like a traditional presentation. I really wanted our audience to just kind of walk with me on a sort of imagination of what a school can be for a community. Really imagining a beacon of opportunity and access for all. So Cincinnati Public Schools, we believe that our schools serve as community learning centers. So not only are we educating the children inside of our schoolhouses through a curriculum that Ms. Simmons leads in our English department, but we're also educating, supporting, encouraging a community and the people in the community. My school happens to be on the west side of Cincinnati, and we are just as interested in what's going on in the lives of the parents, the families, the community members that may not even have children at our school, the corporate partners and for-profit and nonprofit organizations that have their buildings, that have their organizations in our community and nearby and in the greater Cincinnati area. We work with them on a regular basis to bring their skill sets, to bring their expertise, to bring their knowledge into our schools to serve our children, as well as externally serving those folks outside of our schools and in our community. Inside of the schoolhouse, we are engaged with seeing children learn, as Ms. Simmons was speaking about, in a way that's going to develop them to be able to do whatever they choose when they leave our school buildings, when they go on to post-secondary education, they go on to serving our country, or they go into a career. None of these things happen without relationships, and relationships don't happen unless you understand one another. My day as a principal can be quite chaotic, but I enjoy it. It's exciting, but I am interacting with children, with teachers, with parents, with community members, and then I'm also facilitating teachers interacting with one another, teachers interacting with students, students interacting with students, parents interacting with parents, community organizations interacting with other community organizations. It can be quite impressive to see how all of this happens in just a little old schoolhouse. But why? Why are we talking about these things? Why is it important? Because our schoolhouses, I believe, and I believe Cincinnati Public believes this as well, our schoolhouses serve as that beacon of opportunity and access. And in Cincinnati, it's for all. We have really been a leader in the community learning center model. And as a result, it's not only about our children, it's about all. And those things can't work unless we understand each other. And personally, that's where I see, why do we need to talk about racism? Why do we need to have anti-racism policies? Why do we need to learn about our LGBTQ brothers and sisters and what they're going through and how they're developing and why they are saying that they're going to identify as something other than their biological sex? I may not know the answer to that, and the person next to me may not know the answer to that, but that child or that peer is sitting across and they're living that, and that's part of our community. There may be a teacher who's living that reality, and they're part of our community. We may have a parent who's living that reality, and that is part of our community. We believe that as we strive to manifest this sort of the rising tide rises all boats, so that we have better communities where folks want to come to our cities, come to our communities and live. We have citizens who are becoming more and more positive contributors to our society. And of course, we have children who are going to develop to be the future leaders of our cities, our states, and our world. My school, where I'm the principal, we are currently an International Baccalaureate Candidate School. We are striving to learn how to work together, teachers and students, parents and community members, to create a better world for all. As a result, this conversation is important. Now, Susan had asked me to speak about the challenges around it. Quite simply, it's challenging because we don't know. So we don't know what we don't know. So when you listen to Dr. Jeffries speak about the history, that's why that's important. I did not grow up in public education. I was in Catholic schools in Cincinnati. And in part, my mom made that choice because didn't feel like the public schools was going to serve her African-American son well so that he had opportunity and access. That's the truth. And it's a hard reality to hear, but that's the truth. So I grew up in schools where I was one, maybe two of a classroom of 30 or 40 white children. I had a phenomenal educational experience, but I also knew when I became an adult that, well, yes, that was great. And it was great for those who were able to afford it. It costs a lot of money, as we all know, in private education. So it wasn't for all, it was for some. And as a college student who originally wanted to be an engineer and then changed my mind, I learned that, or not really I learned, but that I really became interested in we can be better as a community. We can be better as a city. We can be better as a society. And I wanted to be a part of the work in educating young people and working with adults to do that. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity Cincinnati Public Schools has given me to do that. But yes, it has created challenges because we don't know things. And we don't know things because we haven't been about this in our past, as has already been spoken about. But the reason it's important and the reason these House bills that are working against it are can be critical to can be detrimental to our infrastructure as educated people and as a society is because you're working against the opportunities for people to work together. We cannot work together as a community. Students can't work together if they don't know about each other. My school, as I close, in my school, we have 65% of our students are English learners. They are learning English as a first language. A number of them came here and across the border illegally. I don't know who those students are because we don't ask, because we're not interested in that. Because when they arrive to Cincinnati and you're in the Cincinnati school limit, we teach you. Wherever you came from, we teach you. I also have 25% African Americans who grew up in Cincinnati, and they've never seen someone who came from Ecuador, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico. And they're sitting right next to each other. They also live next to each other on Queen City Avenue and Harrison Avenue, and the list goes on. It all goes together. And if we aren't, as educators, we should be leading in the effort of educating not only our children, but our society in how we all learn how to work together so that we have productive communities. We have top-notch educational institutions that's promoting excellence. And as a result, it's going to make our city better. And then that spurs up to our country. And I think we ought to be leaders in this as Americans. This is the greatest country on this planet in particularly doing this work, the most diverse place. We ought to be leading these efforts as educators, and I'm really proud to be doing that. And thank you again for allowing me to speak and our being alongside our panelists.
You know, we've had a really great combination of honest history and hope for the future. So I'm so happy we have all three of you here. So I wanted to ask you before we start with the questions, if any of you have a question for each other or a comment for each other.
I would just like to say, commend what's going on in Cincinnati. Who knew? Like, this is fantastic, right? Especially in the wake of all that's going on. So, and it's not easy to do, especially in this moment, right? I mean, both Ms. Simmons and Mr. Bokamp, what you're doing is just phenomenal. So please just keep it up. Just keep it up.
And well, you know, one of the go ahead, Al. Did you have anything else to say, or Lanisha?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
You know, one of the questions would be, they are doing these wonderful things. So if this new bill passes, you know, I mean, are these teachers going to get in trouble?
Well, I guess I'll take that one. I think obviously as a public institution, we have to be in accordance with the state of Ohio and the laws and the bills that govern us. But I have no doubt that Cincinnati Public Schools and its Board of Education will continue to pursue what they have made a really strong and bold commitment to, which is what we've already been hearing about, with a strong anti-racism policy and a commitment to educating all, and a commitment to all seeing themselves within their educational curriculum. And I don't see that changing in Cincinnati Public Schools. The sort of tactics around how it's done may have to change if these things come through, but we're going to continue to move forward.
Yeah, we're going to follow the laws. However, as we spoke about earlier, I have not, and I've visited a lot of classrooms, I have not walked into a classroom where I have seen a teacher explicitly saying to a student, "You're racist," or "Your parents are racist," or, I have not, we have not seen that right now. Like I was talking about earlier, teachers, and the majority of them being white teachers, are just working to support and teaching the full history, telling all sides, all perspectives. So I think before we even get there, one, making sure we, as Dr. Jeffrey said, make sure we have a clear understanding of what critical race theory is and a clear understanding of what exactly versus what's actually happening in the classroom.
And can I just make one point? Go ahead, Dr. Jeffries.
No, please.
I think it's really important to make this point to Susan's when she was introducing me about the challenges from a teacher's perspective, and what Ms. Simmons just said. We know that in education it is just statistically dominated by majority white women. And historically, what their experiences have been and from an educational perspective in America is not going to look like the people who they're serving. But guess what? Neither does this guy. I didn't have that experience that my students are having either. And this is where I emphasize the relational aspect of this work. Will that teacher who's just learning about 1619, I didn't know what 1619 was when they started talking about it on the news a year ago. No clue. And I don't have any shame about saying that. It didn't teach me that in my school. And that's water under the bridge, can't get that back. But I'm glad that there's somebody around like Dr. Jeffries who's going to educate me on it. But what we also then have to provide is grace for people. And that's the relational aspect of it. If a teacher's trying to teach a multicultural based curriculum that tries to break through these sort of systemic racist aspects of our society, and they say something wrong, or they imply something that they shouldn't, or there's an innuendo that the student picked up on and goes home and tells her mom, I think my teacher's saying da da da, and the teacher didn't really mean to say that, but they're trying. We ought to give them grace, and we ought to understand that, and we ought to continue to help develop them in learning about it. But none of those things happen if we're not able to talk to one another in a rational, normal way, and realize that we're all, there's a certain humanity around this work. And we're trying to work with young people who are just innocent. I've got a 9-year-old daughter. She just learning this stuff too. And, but they come at a much more pure place than we do. So grace and understanding our humanity, I think, is essential in this as this work, as we push forward, again, to make our societies and communities better.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the Q&A since we have quite a few. I'll go by as they came in. So the first question is, can what happened to those charged with the murder of Malcolm X be taught? So I guess that's a question regarding the new bills.
Yeah, in some places, maybe not, because what does it require you to talk about, right? I mean, civil rights, Black power, assassination. I mean, is that going to make, people, uncomfortable? Yeah, but what part of American history is going to make you uncomfortable if you deal with it honestly? And I think that's part of the problem. I mean, these bills, one, they're so vague, right, that anything can then fall under them, right? I mean, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 2021 marks the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa race massacre. With their bill that is passed, teachers technically shouldn't be able to teach about the Tulsa massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, that's the insanity of this. And so, again, these are bills that are trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. And that isn't something that can be dismissed. That is something that is very dangerous because it has a chilling effect on what teachers can actually teach in the classroom.
Thank you. Next question. The House Committee is working on these bills. They've recently somewhat modified 327. The language has changed slightly to allow teaching but not promotion. Is that an improvement from your point of view?
Yeah, I just want to weigh in and I'm gonna be quiet after this. I promise. I'm gonna be quiet.
No, that was a question for you. Yeah.
Okay. I've been tracking these bills. No, it doesn't make a difference.
No.
Right? Because look, we know what indoctrination is, right? America has a long history of educational indoctrination. It's called the lost cause, right? I mean, you had the Daughters of Confederacy sending Confederate monuments, building statues. We did that for 3/4 of a century. We know what indoctrination looks like. That's not happening in America's classrooms, right? I mean, 80% of K-12 teachers are white women. When did they become these radical revolutionaries, right? That are teaching this? It's not happening. Right. Yeah. So indoctrination is not occurring. So even changing the language and tweaking the language, again, it's so overly broad that it won't have an effect. The problem is the bill itself. The bills don't need to go forward. And that's the only thing that's really gonna stop it, because as long as it's on the books and if it becomes law, it's just gonna allow those who want to silence these conversations to do it in places where you don't, and in schools where you don't have Mr. Beauchamp who is engaged in this. You don't have those who are like we have with Ms. Simmons in Cincinnati. We're like, no, this is the curriculum that we're working around. That's where we're going to see it impact the most. And that's also the people who probably need it the most.
Thank you. And as John Pepper just said, since when have we tried to make people comfortable as we educate them? That's not the purpose. Okay. Next couple of questions from Sarah. Does the curriculum, this is for Lanisha, does the curriculum include more than African-American contribution in addition to sports? And to what extent does the curriculum integrate African-American history and other ethnic groups with the regular curriculum? You kind of did explain that.
Yeah, so absolutely. Absolutely, yes. So those are just a couple screenshots, but the 1619 project, Stamped from the Beginning, a lot of those books are going to be included as part of are being included as part of the African American history course. And like I said, in the core classes, in the with the core curriculum, those lessons that I spoke to with the extensions and the additional lessons being added, as well as just within the core curriculum, there are diverse authors, there are diverse stories, but then you have your traditional, your traditional historical Shakespeare's and those things that students, need to read to be able to access certain things. But yes, absolutely, we want to talk about the full scope of African-American people and African-American history beyond just what we always see, which again is sports, slavery, and so on. But like I said, the joy, the resilience, the hope, the full scope, and like Mr. Beauchamp said, the humanity, because that at the end of the day, if we see each other as humans, we wouldn't be having this conversation in this way. So yes, absolutely. I don't know if did I answer the second part was there a second part? I think I answered it. So yes, and then there are, we're continuing to add those enhancements to the core curriculum, but we are starting with a few this year and hopefully providing that model for teachers so they can continue to do it on their own with the things that we didn't provide.
Thank you, Lanisha. Next couple of questions are from an anonymous attendee. I'm confused about the two bills. My understanding is that they are trying to prohibit teachers from teaching one race is superior to another. Isn't that a good thing? Anybody want to answer that?
Yeah, and I'll weigh in. And now this is where you got to pay attention to the language.
That's right.
Because on the surface, you're absolutely right. Nobody should be teaching that one race isn't real, right? I mean, it's biologically meaningless, but that doesn't mean that racism isn't real, and it doesn't mean that race hasn't shaped the contours of the lives of people. So let's just be clear: there's nobody teaching that, and they're not talking about teaching white supremacy, right? By the way, they're talking about somehow teaching that Black people are inherently superior and that white people are inherently racist and some other silliness like that, right? I mean, that's again designed to sort of mute these tough and uncomfortable conversations around race or racism, but it's couched in this language that people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense because nobody should be teaching. You're right, yeah, we agree. But that's not the intent of the bill. That's what the language says. The intent is designed to silence all conversations about race, all conversations about white supremacy, all conversations about racism. And if you do that, if you continue to perpetuate this ignorance around the role of race and racism, then what you wind up getting is not just people who don't know. You wind up getting people who are willing to storm the Capitol to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. That's where you wind up. And so this has real world consequences. Beyond just this sort of fabricating this idea that somehow little Kylie's being taught that she's responsible for the institution of slavery. It's like, hey, come on, she wasn't born. Nobody alive today was born. What are you talking about, right? But she has to know about the institution of slavery because that informs Jim Crow, which informs mass incarceration, which informs where we are today. So we have to be mindful of the language. Because in this era of colorblindness, we often see this sort of race-neutral, colorblind language, anti-discrimination language that sounds good on the surface, but it masks the intent, which is actually to silence and in some instances to prevent that forward progress towards equality.
Thank you. But either of you want to add anything, Lanisha or Al Pacino?
It's well said.
Okay. Next question. How do you achieve the communication and examination of the best of American history and society and human relations alongside the frank, stark recognition of its tragedies above all slavery and racism and our inhuman treatment of Native Americans. How do you help students navigate this horrible irony and relate it to today? How does this vary by age, grade, and level? You know, and I think part of that has to do with resources that we provide teachers, resources and the kind of language that they need to use. Do they have those resources to know how to teach these things? But who can answer that better than
Well,
I can?
I'll take that a little bit. That my answer to that is honestly, and we as educators, I think we the panelists have said it up here. And I think Susan has also referenced it. As or you said John Pepper did. I mean, there's nothing about education that is sort of inherently supposed to be comfortable, and in fact, it's exactly not that. We talk in education about operating, what we say, on the edges of the zone of proximal development, where we are stretching students. So we know where they are, we know where they need to be, and we want to stretch them to be, to get to that next place. We're always operating just a little bit more than what they can do, and that's how they grow. So these conversations, yes, they need to be scaffolded, and there should be an appropriate sort of a gradation of how the work comes out to a child. So a kindergartner isn't going to have the same conversation as an eighth grader. But what should be reflected in the curriculum is there's a progression from kindergarten to eighth grade where they can have these conversations and have them appropriately, and have them with a purpose. So it all starts with just being honest about these things. And again, that comes when we've had really tough conversations just as teachers. And I have often said, this could be the only thing we do for the year, and we would still need more time, because there's so much in our history as Americans and in our society that we don't understand as a collective. So you go into a Black home, you hear all kinds of stuff about America. And you go into a white home, it's like, what is that? I don't know that America. And I'm a person who knew that. I knew that was my life, because I'm from an African American family, and I was raised in Catholic schools, and almost all of my friends were white, and our worlds could not have been further apart. And it was kind of fun for me, because that's just my nature to sort of see the differences. But we have to begin to pull those things together, and that's oftentimes that's where schools are. We are where society comes together. And that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because that's how we grow, wrestling with these issues. That's how children learn and become educated. Pose these questions to children, and you will get amazing responses. But it's hard to do, and it's uncomfortable to do. But kids will be like, oh yeah, I would have done da 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 da. And you're like, wow, that's the joy of being an educator, because I get to see that every day. But we have to create an opportunity for that. And if, as Dr. Jeffrey said, if we have a bill that's stifling our ability to do that, because we're limiting the materials, so Ms. Simmons cannot create a rigorous and coherent curriculum, then the things that I see as a school principal are mitigated and limited, and they don't produce the kind of society that we strive to be.
Great
I
answer.
was going to add, that's a great question, because right now, Thanksgiving is right around the corner. So, in classrooms, we're seeing a lot of hand turkeys being made and, preparing for the celebration. But I'm also seeing a lot more the conversations around the truth about what actually took place during this time. And as Mr. Beauchamp said, there is a progression. It's going to look different in kindergarten than it does in 12th grade. But the conversations, I am seeing a lot more of these conversations being had. And when these conversations are had and students are able to see the truth, it also creates space for more empathy. So when students know that this happened for this reason, or they know that these people were treated badly for this reason, many of our students are like, what? Why? Like, why would we treat people this way? And that creates a space for them to have empathy. So again, these things don't continue to repeat themselves throughout our history. So it's important for the kindergarten to understand history and understand empathy all the way up to that student in 12th grade and what that looks like. So I think that's how you kind of juxtapose that horrible history along with the irony and what it could be, what we could see if that truth is told.
Thank you. Next question from Connie. So CPS is already providing multicultural, anti-racist curriculum. Has there been any hue and cry from the parents or the public? I'm not aware of that, if it does exist, and where is the momentum for these House bills?
I can answer the first part a little bit. So for ELA, this was our first year rolling it out like this way for ELA. Now we'll say the history department with Dave Travel, they rolled out last year, ordering the stamp books and those different things. And I know he definitely received some pushback, but what made me most proud was that the pushback and the cries that he heard, he was 100% supported. We, want 100% supported by the district. So leadership, 100% supported. We had no feeling that we were going to have to pull these books from schools. Like, we were 100% supported by district leadership, regardless of the outcry. Was making sure we continue to provide education and awareness. Like, hey, this is Cincinnati Public Schools. Like, this is the middle of the city. We're not going to remove these books from the classroom. At this point, it's important that we have them. So yes, there was some outcry, but we were 100% supported from history, and so far so good, at least from my office, my area. So far so good in ELA.
Great. So, the momentum for the House bills, we kind of know where it came from, right, Dr. Jeffries? You already sort of spoke to that in your introduction.
Yeah, it's politics. It's a manufactured crisis. It's political hysteria because it plays well. And again, it would be nice if we could just leave it at that and leave it in the realm of politics, but it has bled over into, into what we teach our children. We don't take, as educators, we don't take the equivalent of a Hippocratic oath. But if we did, the first point would be do no harm. And included in that is don't lie. You can't lie to kids. And this is asking us, either by these bills, this conversation, this discussion, saying, no, you're not gonna talk about race and racism. You're not gonna talk about gender discrimination. You're not gonna talk about sexual orientation. You're actually telling us as teachers to withhold the truth from our kids. And as was already said, this ain't a kid problem, right? Like, kids will talk about anything, right? Age appropriate, right? They scare me sometimes. They'll talk about anything. We're the ones who impose our discomfort on them.
Yeah.
And we're the ones who are stifling them. And now we're doing it through legislation. And that's even more problematic. But yeah, we have to recognize sort of the political angle of this, because the tide will turn eventually, right? This is a political moment. You want to be on the right side of this when this thing passes. So you don't want to be pulling stuff. You want to be on the right side of this. And the good thing is, those who want to teach these difficult subjects, who want to teach art history, who want to talk about race and racism, who want to share the books and the literature that we're talking about, we don't have to make anything up, right? It's like, no, this stuff actually all happened. It's still going on. This is what we need to focus on. You want to talk about Ali? Let's talk about Ali. You want to talk about all these figures? Let's talk about all these figures. We don't have to make anything up. We actually stand on the side of truth. But sometimes our voice is a little bit too soft. It's not loud enough. And sometimes the loudest voice is the one who actually doesn't actually stand on anything, right?
Yeah.
That's why they're barking so loud. So I think that's important to put that in context as well.
Okay. We have like 5 or 6 more questions. You guys still okay time-wise? Panelists, are you all okay? Where have there been successful pushback, and what can we as citizens do? Pushback on the bills, and what can we as citizens do?
You know, in watching the bills, there hasn't been a lot of successful pushback, right? I mean, Republican-controlled state legislatures across the country have been successful wherever they have been a majority in passing these bills through. Where we have seen like strong pushback has been at the grassroots level, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily in preventing these bills from being passed. You'll see some moderation as we're seeing now with Ohio, but eventually they've almost all gone through. But we've seen students, we've seen young people say, no, you're not pulling that book from our library. No, you're not getting rid of this teacher. No, you're not firing this principal, right? We want this person back, as we're seeing in Texas. So it's been difficult to stop the momentum of the bills, but hopefully with that grassroots presence, really led by young people, by students, galvanizing their parents to say, wait a minute, you know, this is a step too far, right? You're not changing, you're not getting rid of these classes and stuff. So looking to students, and we've seen some in some counties, usually at the county level in Virginia, we've seen some in Pennsylvania. We see up in the Cleveland area, students are beginning to organize around this. And so I think looking at that level is where we've seen the most success, but hopefully that will rise to the level of pushing back at the state legislative level so we don't have to deal with these bills at all.
Okay, I think in Ohio, we've had quite a few teachers that have testified against the bills. So next question, can one or more of the panelists speak to the challenges that these bills pose for teacher training? If higher ed is prohibited to present this knowledge to teachers in training and professional development for teachers cannot include some of these topics, they'll necessarily be less prepared for these important conversations. So even if teachers want to work within the law, won't they still be less professionally prepared to be effective in creating inclusive spaces for our students? Great question.
Again, I guess I'll speak to
Okay.
that. I would say the challenge would be great. And this is, again, why bills such as these need to not move forward. It's hard enough to develop teachers during the school year when we really want teachers to be in front of students and educating them. That's, as a principal, that's what it's game time for us every day when August hits. And we do have professional development that goes on throughout the year, but it's a sort of a lagging effect. So teachers may be learning things, but then they have to build it into their lessons. They have to, and a topic like this is heavy and it's difficult and it's hard. A teacher just doesn't, you just don't give them a book and then tomorrow it's good. So we really need to work against these kind of things that is just, it not only stifles our teachers' ability to grow, stifles our children's ability to grow, it stifles our communities. So that's the wrong direction. And we've Cincinnati Public Schools works very closely to the University of Cincinnati in trying to align our practices at the pre-K-12 level with the higher ed level and vice versa. So there needs to be a seamless transition from teacher prep programs into schools. And so this is my automatic lights that go out. There they go. So yes, we need the training sooner, we need it earlier, and we need it in our universities.
Next question has been answered, so I think we have 3 left. It seems the bills seek to prohibit all bias teaching. Wouldn't that also eliminate teaching from white bias, which is what we're trying to achieve? Are the bills and their intention being misinterpreted?
Yeah, no, I mean, that speaks to sort of the post-civil rights era language and legislation of sort of the colorblindness. It's like, no, we're not, we're against all discrimination, right? Like this is sort of this universal language, but it's clear what the intent is and how it will play out. because that's what we're seeing. We're not talking about, let's pass this legislation because we're concerned that textbooks are referring to enslaved people as servants. That's not what this conversation is about, right? They're not saying that, oh, there's a real problem with the way in which, we're teaching kindergartners about the founders and not talking about them as enslaved people, right? That's not where this is coming from. So while the language says, yeah, it applies to everybody, the problem ain't everybody. The problem of racism ain't Black people discriminating against white people. That ain't the problem in America. When did that happen? Right. And so we got to get away from this sort of universal language and just deal with concretely and specifically with what we're talking about. So anytime you have things that sort of dance around the edges, like, oh, it's about universal, no, that raises the red flag immediately, because we know what that is designed to do, right? We just had a resolution. Just think about this for a second. We just had a resolution passed in July that said we're going to deal with racism and we're going to deal with systemic racism. And then that gets yanked for something that says we're going to deal with all bias. Like, no. Why did you get rid of the first one if that was your concern? That's not the concern. So I think we have to be clear in that and not fall for that sort of race neutral, bias neutral language when we know what the problem is and we know we need to target it directly.
Thank you. Next question. How do you suggest ensuring that there won't be shaming happening? Is it a natural byproduct of our history that by teaching it fully and accurately, that white kids will feel shame or guilt, especially those who are especially empathetic?
I'll speak to kind of the K-12 setting. I think kind of going back what Mr. Beauchamp was talking about earlier, those relationships, it's also about, especially in the K-12 setting, those environments that are created. Like I talk about the safe space for courageous conversations, right? So there is a way, especially early on, that you want to present this information or make sure there's a way where, like I said, we're not placing blame on you, but again, you have to understand the history to be able to make the next best decision for the future. So I think it's all about the way the information is presented. It's about that space, that community that we are working towards creating. So if there is a tinge of shame or a tinge of guilt, then that means we need to provide a little bit more education. We need to give you a little bit more information to support you through that process of getting you to where we need you to go. So it's not about shaming. It's not about guilting. It's about hope for the future. It's about not repeating the same mistakes that were previously made.
I will just add to that, in Cincinnati Public Schools, we are educating children for action. So we want them to be action-oriented in our communities, cities, and our country. So I think sometimes in this conversation, sort of like when I hear sort of questions, there seems to be I will call this a bit of a narrow focus on the very specific components of what's being said. The specific facts. The facts are important, and we need to be honest and true to the facts, but the facts aren't the end. They just begin the conversation. As educators, we're educating children to be action-oriented problem solvers. So to just stop at to stop at an idea that would make a child feel shameful, I would believe is missing the point of why we were ever talking about it. And then those children learning we learn about our history. Why are we learning about it? Like Dr. Jeffries spoke about, learning about our history so that we don't repeat what we did in the past, so that the future can be better. What's the future? The future of our societies, the future of our country, our communities. So the orientation is toward problem solving. So, kind of when you think of it like that, there's really no room for shame. Like we're working together to solve a problem. We're reflecting on the history, and there's shameful aspects of the history, but that's not where we are. That's where we were, and look where we can be, and let us work together to do that. So.
If I could just weigh in ever so briefly,
Okay.
I mean, one of the things House Bill 322 actually prohibits is it prohibits providing credit for public policy engagement
Right.
for students. In other words, the public school student will now be, if this bill goes through, will now be prohibited from getting credit for actually engaging in public policy work, right? From doing that very thing of how do you learn practically how to be a good citizen, how to be a good public servant, right? I mean, if it's around social justice issues, right? So, I mean, I think that is really revealing and telling that at the core of this is this fear that if you teach about the past and the present in honest ways, that is going to lead to some change that people, that a number of people don't want. But the kids want it. I get them at Ohio State all the time. They're like, they learn this, it's like, man, this isn't right. Like, yeah, it's not right. And do they feel bad? They're like, Dr. Jeffries, I feel bad. Yeah, you should feel bad. Like, we all should feel bad about what happened. Doesn't mean you're responsible for it. That goes back to the blame and shame. It's just not happening. But we hear that cold language, so then suddenly like, oh, I got to protect my child. Ain't nobody blaming them for the stuff of the past or the present. They're not responsible for that, but they are responsible for one thing. Every kid that's in the classroom now is responsible for one thing, and that's for tomorrow. And they are responsible for what happens tomorrow. And we're responsible for preparing them for tomorrow. And they will not be prepared. They will fail the job if we withhold this honest conversation, this honest teaching about the past and present from them. We will fail them, and then they will fail at the task that they are responsible for, which is making this better society tomorrow.
That is the perfect way to say it. Perfect. You're so right. Let me see. There's another question here. How do schools move forward when we're being inundated with record requests? This is kind of a, I don't know, record request to show us everything in class that's being taught. Schools are now being asked to prove we're not indoctrinating and encouraging hate between kids. We understand the intent is silence, and I worry it's working as teachers tell us they're afraid to say the word racism in the classroom. A loud but growing minority of parents in the suburbs are pushing this. So what do we do?
No, I will say that is actually one of the great challenges. And the questioner just laid out exactly what one of the problems is.
Yeah.
That this idea of records requests, and we're seeing it in all these bills, like, oh, you just file a petition, ask for the records, inundate, and then schools have to, I mean, do you not have enough, Mr. Beauchamp, on your plate already than going into and filing and asking for curriculum and then sending it out to a school board? It's insanity, right? I mean, if you want us to, the teachers, let the teachers teach, right? You don't watch the History Channel video on Fox News and suddenly you think you know what's going on. Let the teachers teach. But the way it will stifle learning is through these record requests, is through requiring school boards to then do this and then file these lawsuits and then all these appeals. And then so, you know, school boards are gonna be like, look, we don't want to touch it. Principals are gonna be like, we don't want to touch it. Teachers are gonna be like, we don't want to touch it, right? And that's the way you get that silencing, that chilling effect on freedom of speech and actually not just academic freedom, but academic integrity.
And I would, go ahead, Ms. Simmons.
I was just say I would encourage teachers as part of this process, because I have heard from English teachers who have specifically said like they are afraid to say certain things in classrooms now because of everything that's taken place. But I would encourage them to look at their school's board policy. A lot of different districts' board policy, they may not have an anti-racist policy, but they have like a controversial topics policy, or they have different policies or a curriculum policy that actually aligns to the fact that they can teach these things. So I would encourage them to look at their board policies, if you know, to continue that conversation and continue that work. Also, the different committees are being formed as part of Ohio Department of Education and English Language Arts to work towards and this not happening. So I would just encourage teachers who are experiencing this to see kind of what is available to support them so they can continue fighting the good fight. It is difficult. It is very, very difficult, but reach out for resources so we can continue to support you, because we can't allow these conversations to stop.
And I would just quickly, and note as you bring it to an end, Susan, the so community engagement. So the things that I was speaking about this community learning center model, it's almost like, I mean, this is why sometimes I get more gray hair. It's like I am running two parallel schools concurrently every day because we're educating children internally in our buildings, but we're also educating the external community. What you just said sounds like to me, the parents, the adults need some education. So I'm going to engage them. I don't want to shut them down. I want to hear your concerns. Why do you think we shouldn't be talking about this? Bring them to the schoolhouse and let's get some parent education going on, because the kids are ready. They're off and running. And long as we aren't stifling them, they're going to be our next leaders in our society. It's going to make our country better. But while we do that, we also we have an older generation that they didn't come through schools like that. Me too. I didn't either. And we need to be educated as well. So schools being committed to, like Cincinnati, to educating our communities is equally important. Just as rigorous as Ms. Simmons described what we're doing for our children, we need to have something fairly rigorous in that direction for our parents as well and our community.
I feel bad. I have to let Louise, I have to let Amy Bottomley get on for just a minute because I promised her she could tell us about the initiatives at the Freedom Center. So Amy, are you still there?
I am still here.
Go ahead.
Hey, thank you. And actually, I'm really excited about this opportunity to let you know about what we're doing in our education team here at the Freedom Center, because it is in support of everything that I've heard going on tonight. I've been alone in my office and nodding my head the entire time like a bobblehead. So let me tell you about what we can do to offer to help all of these things happen. So here at the Freedom Center, our big initiative in the education department is we are encouraging teaching for social justice. And so one of the big things that we're doing is this spring, we are going to launch a big curriculum that's all focused on teaching for social justice. So this includes inclusion of multiple perspectives with emphasis on those traditionally overlooked or purposely disregarded, development of critical literacy skills, connections between past and present, but probably most excitingly, student empowerment to generate change. And so just as I've heard all of you say, the purpose of teaching these hard histories and these hard truths is not to promote guilt, not to make us feel bad. It's about empowerment. We learn about the past to empower ourselves to change the future, and we want to give students the skills to do that. So that this means we need to support our teachers. That is the number one thing that we need to do. We need to support the teachers who are boots on the ground doing this work. And so besides the creation of the materials, which includes these inquiries that are C3 aligned and state and nationally standard aligned, it means that we're going to create virtual experiences that students can bring in their classroom or teachers can bring in their classroom. It means this spring and summer, when teachers are planning for next year, we want to offer workshops and we want to offer online support. But perhaps more importantly than all of those things right now, given what's going on in our state legislature, we need to provide vocal support. So we need to provide public support. Teachers have a job to do. They can't be combating legislation while they're trying to do this hard work in the classroom. So here at the Freedom Center, and for all of us listening, we have an obligation to provide that vocal support. So I would encourage anyone who wants to engage in conversation, who wants to promote resources and ideas, to contact us here at the Freedom Center. We are a convener and we are advocators. And so that is a big push that we're going to have going on this year, is to support our teachers. Meanwhile, we have online materials that you can check out right now. We have dramatic reading videos. We have an unmasking reality series. Today, Chris Miller just conducted one about conscious and unconscious bias in urban planning. All of these videos are online. We just posted, and you led me into it nicely, Dr. Jeffries. We just posted a whole bunch of materials about teaching tough history, specifically about the Tulsa Race Massacre. And so we have an interview with an author, Carol Boston Weatherford, who wrote a beautiful picture book. We have a performance by the Cincinnati Symphony. We have an inquiry and lesson plans that I designed to go along with it, all to support teachers and to educate and to encourage students and empower them to go out there and make positive change. I said it as quickly as I could.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate all of that. And it's just a compliment to what we've done tonight. So at this point, I know we're over our time. I can't thank our panelists enough. And John Pepper, thank you for all your wonderful comments in the chats. This has been an incredible night. It's such an important subject. We have to keep talking about it. In groups like the Women's City Club and the Cincinnati Association, I know we have all written letters that we have sent, press releases. We sent them to legislators opposing the bills. So public groups that continue to do that, we encourage all of our nonprofit co-sponsors to do that, and we'll continue to encourage them to oppose the bills. Because you're right, Amy, teachers don't have time to do it. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan, and thank you to all of our speakers.
Yeah.
And before we leave tonight, I just wanted to pick up on something that Amy said about student empowerment for social change, because that, I think, relates very well to a speaker that we're bringing in on April 6th of next year. His name is Dr. Mary Frances Berry, who will be speaking on race, protest, and politics. Where do we go from here? And she is a professor, writer, lawyer, activist. She chaired the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. And one of the books that she wrote is History Teaches Us to Resist: How Progressive Movements Have Succeeded in Challenging Times. And it examines the successful tactics of movements that ended the Vietnam War, jump-started the government response to the AIDS epidemic, championed the Americans with Disabilities Act, and advanced civil, women's, and LGBTQ rights. So there is hope.
There is
we
hope.
can, yes, we need to push back. But if we keep talking and keep pursuing the truth, there is hope yet for the American
Yes, and
experiment.
we just had a chat from a Board of Education member, Kara Kendricks, who said, thank you to everybody tonight. This gives me hope to continue the fight.
Right.
Want to do?
Okay. Keep on
Yep.
fighting. Right.
And
That's
thank you
what
so
Marian
much.
Spencer
By,
said.
by the way, so I just want to tell all of our panelists, you are absolutely members of Women's City Club for the next year at least. And you're getting our communication, so you'll know about our programs. Thank you all so much. And Amy, you of course too. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Thank
so much.
you.
Have a good night and good luck.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
I'll be in touch. So, oh,